Yeah. No, I would say that, anyway, the bottom line in marine insurance is definitely, I mean, the reduced frequency of claim. The younger worldwide fleet have decreased massively the number of incidents, but I mean, if the underwriters globally are losing money since 18 years, this is a clear proof that there is not enough premium to cover for the major losses, and they have just to, I mean, trust in a very lucky year, if you like, to see figures in black and not in red. So that's, I mean, certainly a worrying situation going forward, and can somehow mirror the situation of the freight market that it was extensively debated earlier on today. Still, there is a lot of liquidity. Many people invest in marine insurance, and that's, of course, prevent rates to go to a level which allows the underwriter to make a sound profit and not just a profit which is not enough to pay for the major losses. Then, I mean, Federico will introduce the next speaker, and then we'll continue marine insurance later on.
So good, away from premiums and loss ratio for a moment. Let's go back to trading for a moment and the challenges which shipping operators are facing in trying to understand the current state of affairs on sanctions. Sanctions is a nightmare, it's a maze, as Mike has described it. So Mike, enlighten us on this.
Thank you very much, Federico. Could I have the blipper, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that you've all had a very good lunch, you've all had a glass of wine, so you will be relieved to hear that I'm not going to put up a complete list of US and EU sanctions for you to digest. 3 reasons for that. You would definitely all be asleep by the end of it. Secondly, I don't think I could. And thirdly, in mitigation, I don't think my US lawyer could either recite every single piece of legislation that pertains to sanctions in US and certainly not in Europe as well. They are indeed that voluminous. What I want to do is to start by reciting or recalling an incident which happened about 3 years ago when I, along with a number of other members of group clubs, was in the States meeting various officials from OFAC and the State Department, trying to explain what clubs did and what our industry did and the problems that sanctions pose to you as ship owners and ship operators. And halfway through this, our contact within OFAC took me to one side and said, look, Mike, what you've got to do is you've got to realize that within the State Department there are dozens of bright young diplomats running around absolutely over the moon with their new discovery, and that new discovery is sanctions, economic trade sanctions, because they see that as the way to export US and EU foreign policy without the need for soldiers, loss of life, boots on the ground, call it what you will. And it's quite easy to see when you reflect on it why sanctions have been so effective. Look at your own industry and the financial services which dominate it. You know, 80% of trade finance is conducted in the US dollar. 90% of world trade is conducted at sea. And then from the insurance point of view, yep, you know, the P&I clubs are insuring 90–95% of blue water tonnage. So I liken sanctions to a form of modern medieval siege warfare. Why on earth would you want to impose your foreign policy by sending soldiers up to the walls of the city with great loss of life when you can surround a state and starve it into submission? Wrong button. So what are the features of modern sanctions, if I can get this to work? The reason why it doesn't work? Ah, right, okay. No. Okay, well, I can continue while we... Okay, there we go. The first principal feature of the modern trade sanction is, of course, that it is extraterritorial. And by that I mean that it has effect in the state other than that one that legislated for it. You only have to look at BNP Paribas to understand just how exposed we all are in the world. They paid a fine recently of some $9 billion for infringements of US sanctions. The second feature, if this is now working, is that they target specifically financial services. This is the big and exciting new dimension in trade sanctions. They don't need to have jurisdiction over the ship that is trading the sanctions-breaking goods because they can hit the insurers and the financiers behind it. And without those insurers, without those financiers, that trade really can't take place. And thirdly, the other new and distinctive feature is that they are highly effective. And they're effective because, as a P&I club manager, simple claims person, I find out where one of our ships is and what it's carrying when it crashes, when it spills oil, when something goes wrong. But the people who are policing sanctions have much greater resources. They have satellites in the sky, they have people on the ground, they know what's going into the containers that are coming out of the Far East, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and heading off to the war zones of the world. So they work. And if you want, and again, an example of how they work, I don't expect you to read that particular slide. You might just be able to make out the figures on the bottom. This is the reduction in Iranian oil exports over the period of sanctions. So if you look at the daily output of oil from Iran pre-sanctions, it was running at about 2.5 million barrels per day. That was in 2011. By 2013, that had dropped to about 1.1 million barrels per day, less than half. By the time the Joint Plan of Action was signed in November of last year, that was down to about 1.05. In terms of what that does to your economy, well, first of all, Iran's hard currency has been severely depleted. On a monthly basis, about 1.5 billion US dollars was accumulating in foreign accounts. This was money that was due to Iran, which it couldn't access because the banks would not transmit the money for Iran's oil back to the Iranian state. Iran's foreign currency holdings are roughly about $100 billion. They only had access to about $20 billion of that. GDP decline, yep, well, Iran's economy shrank for the first time in 20 years following the introduction of sanctions, went down by, I think, 5% last year. Currency decline, before sanctions, you could buy a dollar with about 13,000 rials. That rose up to 40,000 rials to the dollar in 2013. Inflation officially is about 45% in Iran at the moment, but unofficially somewhere between 50 and 75%. And of course, none of that supports anything like any real sort of industrial production. So the car industry, which was a big mainstay of the Iranian economy, has fallen apart. And that was one of the sectors that was specifically targeted for relief following the signature of the Joint Plan of Action back in November last year. So sanctions really do work. The evidence of that is that President Rouhani, who was elected to replace Ahmadinejad, was done so as the most moderate of the approved candidates on the basis that he would try and improve relations with the West and try and have the sanctions burden eased. And now to the main point of today. Of course, sanctions don't really just relate to Iran. The USA has 26 nations across the world which are subject to some form of trade restriction. And of course, it's not just the US. We also have our friends here in Europe. They have some 20 or so states which are subject to European trade sanctions, including, as you'll see there, China. So it isn't just about Iran. It's not just about Syria. You really can't avoid them if you're involved in international trade. In practice, what do they mean for you, the ship owner, the ship operator, for us, the insurer? Well, most obviously, they mean that you can't carry certain goods into Iran or wherever it happens to be. So you can't carry refined petroleum products into Iran, because if you do, and you're European, you will go to prison. You will, whether you're European or not, you will be shut out of the US financial markets. If you're a ship owner who cares about his insurance, you won't have any. So really, there is a pretty total and effective prohibition on certain goods into certain states. But slightly more subtle is the operational interference which you as traders and operators are starting to see, and I think we'll see a lot more of in the future. And this relates really to governments going directly, or flag states going directly to ship owners to say, Mr. Ship owner, we know that you've got a 5,000 TEU container ship coming out of the Far East heading for West Africa. Do you know that at the bottom of the stack in hold number 3, we think there's a container with some weapons on board destined for an unlawful regime? And that poses quite a dilemma for you. You have to decide whether to act on that piece of information, deviate your ship, deviate under the contracts of carriage for all the other 4,999 bills of lading or contracts of carriage, take that container out of the bottom of the stack and see whether that information is correct or not, or ignore that information at your peril. And that increasingly is causing certainly our members, and I think members of other clubs in the international group, some real difficulty. Of course, if you are involved in unlawful trading, the contracts which you enter into are not going to be enforceable. And for good measure, the cover exclusions, if you trade in any way which puts any of your clubs or other insurers at risk of being in breach of sanctions, then quite frankly, we have no risk appetite at all. We are so exposed to the financial penalties in the United States that we wash our hands of you, and you'll, north of England certainly, cease to be a member of the club from the moment you put us at risk of breaking sanctions for that particular ship. But perhaps the biggest burden really is the compliance burden. And I think really if I can make one point today, it is this, and that is that if you're involved in international trade, exposed to being used as a vehicle for transporting illicit goods. If you haven't got a developed compliance program, a program where you get to know your customer, get to know their cargoes, and are able to demonstrate that to the authorities, then please do so, because the most innocent of ship owners can get caught up in these sorts of trades. So what's coming up? A little peek at the future. Mr. Rouhani, everybody hoped that his election would signify a change in direction by Iran. And we've had a more relaxed sanctions regime towards Iran for the last 12 months, coming up for expiry on the 24th of November. What I would say about that is don't hold your breath. Mr. Rouhani was quoted in the press only last month as saying that whilst there have been some steps, there has been no significant developments in the negotiations between I think it's the P5+1 and the state of Iran. And talking to a UK government official last 2 weeks ago, he was saying pretty much exactly the same thing. Some of the gaps are beginning to widen. Therefore, I would not be surprised if some of the relaxation in measures that were introduced in November last year were repealed or withdrawn come November. We may even see more sanctions against Iran rather than less. Syria, another big problem area. Again, talking to the same official, he indicated that the sanctions regime directed at Syria and the importation of weapons and other materials into Syria, which is causing the conflict or helping the conflict continue, is really not rigorous enough. So I, again, would not be surprised to see Europe legislating further against shipments whose ultimate destination is Syria. And that's the point. You know, when you get your cargo manifesto, your bill of lading, it doesn't say, the Syrian government in Syria as the ultimate consignee or discharge port. It's going to be routed through a rather more convoluted chain and misdescribe the goods on the way there. Russia-Ukraine has gone very quiet recently, but it was telling that the EU did not relax the measures that it had introduced against Russia following the ceasefire, probably because there is no real ceasefire. The fighting is continuing around Donetsk, it seems to me, pretty much as intensely as it was before the ceasefire. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more measures directed at Russia as well. And then please don't forget our friends in Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is one of the world's most prolific unlawful arms exporters. And if you're involved in any sort of trade, taking goods out of the Far East through to West Africa and the Middle East, then you really do need to know your customer and know what cargoes you're carrying and have processes to be able to demonstrate that you do your best. So, conclusion, what can it wasn't a very optimistic message, was it? But what I wanted to get across is that sanctions are now part and parcel of what you do as ship owners. They are not going to go away. They are an extremely effective foreign policy tool, and the politicians and the diplomats like them. So we have to adapt, and we have to find ways to work around them, whether you're ship owners or us, the insurers, because we also are targeted on certain measures. An observation, in 2010, when CISADA, the first big piece of US extraterritorial legislation, came in, it was characterized by a lack of understanding of our industry, the insurers, and your industry as ship owners and ship operators. But that's changed completely now. The US in particular, and the EU too, through our efforts, but through your efforts as well as ship owners, know an awful lot about shipping. They know very well how the industry works. They know very well how our insurance covers work. So on that note, I think more or less just about on time, say thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mike. See you in 4 or 5 years' time to see where we are again.